Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into something slower, quieter. The kind of quiet that doesn't mean peace. The kind that feels like someone's listening even when you can't hear them. And you're about to find out why, in this place, being a little too curious about the soul could be the worst decision you've ever made. Congratulations, you've just woken up as a Gnostic during the height of the Inquisitions. The good news, you're still breathing. The bad news, every breath is already a risk. Your eyes open to the dim flicker of a tallow candle, its smoke curling in lazy spirals toward the cracked ceiling of a rented stone room. The air smells faintly of wax, damp cloth, and something metallic you can't name. You don't remember falling asleep, not really. You drifted off while staring at the wall, reciting half a prayer in your head, the other half hidden even from yourself. The blanket over you is thin enough to see the outline of your knees beneath it, rough against your skin and holding onto the chill of the night. Somewhere in the street outside, a cart rattles over uneven cobblestones, the sound sharp enough to remind you that the world is still turning without you. You shift, slowly. Every movement is deliberate now, the kind you make when you know sound travels farther than it should. On the small table beside you sits a clay cup, half filled with water that you boiled last night, cooled and blessed in your own quiet way. Not the church's blessing, yours. You glance at the far corner, where a cloth bag sits folded on itself. Inside are a few pages of handwritten notes, copied from a copy of a copy, each line a thought you shouldn't have put in ink. Ideas about the soul as light trapped in flesh, about the divine spark, about knowledge that frees instead of condemns. The room is simple, but you've memorized every detail, as if the walls might one day need to be described under oath. A low cot, a table, a stool with a wobble in its left leg, a narrow window covered with linen to keep the wind out, and to keep the wrong eyes from looking in. Beyond that window, you know the friars are already walking the streets, hands folded into their sleeves, eyes searching in a way that's meant to look casual. The Inquisition likes casual. They like it when suspicion feels like an accident. You breathe in, slow. There's a rhythm to surviving here, and it starts the moment you wake up. Don't open the door too quickly. Don't draw back the curtain in the morning light. Don't speak to anyone before you've had time to measure your words, like grain before baking. In this place, your thoughts are not your own, not because they can be read, but because they can be guessed. A single wrong phrase, a pause too long, a look too sharp at the wrong sermon, and suddenly you're not part of the crowd anymore. The candle sputters, throwing a shadow across the wall that looks almost like a figure in a hood. You blink, and it's gone, but the feeling lingers. You pull the blanket tighter, not for warmth, but for the illusion of safety. This is your morning now, not coffee, not sunlight. Just the knowledge that even in the smallest hours, someone might already be asking about you, and you can't decide if it's better to be remembered or forgotten. The bell rings before the sun fully clears the rooftops, a hollow metallic sound that rolls down the narrow streets like a slow wave. It's not a sharp alarm, it doesn't demand urgency. It's steadier, heavier, a sound meant to gather people without letting them forget why they're gathering. For most in the town, it's a call to begin the day in prayer at the church, to kneel in the shadow of candles and breathe the same incense-filled air. But for you, the sound isn't an invitation, it's a warning. The bell says, this is where you don't belong. You listen to it through the linen-covered window, standing in the middle of your small room, your bare feet pressed against cold stone. You could go, of course. You could walk in with everyone else, take a place near the back, and mouth along to the words like a shadow of yourself. You've done it before, when the air felt too sharp with suspicion. But the risk isn't in showing up. The risk is in being noticed, in the way your silence between prayers might stretch a little too long, or in the way your gaze might drift to the crucifix without quite focusing on it. They say faith is seen in the eyes. The wrong eyes can see something else entirely. So instead, you stay. The bell continues, slow and measured, its final toll lingering as if it doesn't want to let go. You close your eyes and picture the inside of the church, the rows of benches polished smooth by generations of knees, the pale light slanting through narrow windows, the faces turned toward the altar. You know the rhythm of the liturgy by heart, when the congregation kneels, when they stand, when they bow their heads. You even know the exact point where the words begin to scrape against your own understanding, where you have to swallow down the reflex to think of something older, something the priests would call dangerous. In your own space, you light a small candle, its flame unsteady in the draught sneaking under the door. You sit on the stool, legs drawn close, and whisper your morning words, not aloud, never fully aloud. Just enough that you can feel them form in your mouth, each syllable shaped with care. These aren't the prayers sanctioned by Rome. They're fragments of phrases copied from memory and smoothed into something you can carry quietly. They don't ask for mercy. They don't promise obedience. They search instead for light, for truth, for the tiny spark you believe rests in every soul like an ember. You pause when you hear footsteps outside, not heavy boots, just the shuffle of sandals on stone. A friar, perhaps, making his rounds after the bell. The steps pass, and you breathe again. The candle flickers, as if it's listening with you. When the sound of the church service drifts faintly through the window, the rise and fall of voices chanting in unison, you let it wash over you. It's almost comforting, in a strange way, to hear the cadence without being part of it. But you know better than to think of it as harmless. The chant is not just devotion, it's a net, cast wide across the town, and you've learned to keep yourself small enough to slip through. When the church bells fade into the quiet hum of daily life outside, that's when your own morning begins. Not the public one, not the crossing of yourself at the fountain or the polite nod to neighbours on the way to the chapel, but the real one, the one you don't mention, even to those who seem like they might understand. It starts with clearing the table, pushing aside the clay cup and the crumbs from last night's bread, as though sweeping away any trace of the world's touch. The surface underneath is uneven, worn soft from years of use, and in the grain of the wood you trace shapes that no one else would recognise. The air in the room feels heavier now, as if it knows this is the hour for things that should not be seen. You take the small linen pouch from under your cot, the one tied shut with a knot that only your fingers seem to remember, and pour its contents onto the table. A few smooth stones, each carved with marks so shallow they're almost invisible unless the light hits them just right. They're not symbols anyone here would understand, not Latin, not the script taught by the priests. They're older, crooked lines passed down in whispers and hidden in the margins of letters that never reached their official destinations. You arrange them slowly, one by one, in a circle. It's not a circle meant to trap or protect. It's meant to remind, a small, silent map of the soul's journey. The teachings say that light falls into matter the way a drop falls into a well. Your life is the climb back upward. You don't know if it's true, but you know how it feels to hold the thought in your mind like a pebble in your palm, solid, quiet, and a little heavier than it should be. From the shelf above the bed, you take down a folded scrap of parchment. It's been handled so many times the edges are soft as cloth. The ink is faint, the handwriting cramped to fit as much as possible in the space. Some of the words are familiar, others are still a puzzle. The language bends and twists, mixing prayers with riddles, instruction with metaphor. You mouth the lines silently, letting them pass through your mind like water through cupped hands, knowing you can't hold them all at once. A knock sounds in the distance, not at your door, but somewhere along the street, and you pause, every muscle listening. A moment later, voices murmur low, indistinct. You wait until they fade, before you move again. The candle on the table has burned down to a shallow pool of wax, and you press one fingertip into it, watching the print it leaves as it cools. This, too, is part of the ritual, the small act that fixes the memory of the morning into your senses, so that even if the parchment burns or the stones are scattered, the rhythm of what you've done will live in your body. When you finish, you gather the stones back into the pouch, fold the parchment carefully, and place them where they were. To anyone else, the room looks unchanged. To you, it's been remade. A space stitched back together in silence, with a thread no one else can see. Breakfast isn't the grand moment it used to be before you learned to watch over your own shoulder. Now it's an exercise in caution as much as it is in eating. The loaf you pull from the cloth wrap is yesterday's bread, hard at the edges, soft only in the middle if you press it carefully. It smells faintly of ash from the hearth, and the flour still carries the scent of the mill, a dusty tang that sticks to your hands. You break it slowly, catching the crumbs on the table so none roll to the floor where they might later betray the quiet of your morning with the sound of a mouse in the dark. Beside it is a clay cup, filled with water you drew before dawn. It's not just water, not for you. It was poured carefully into the cup after a moment's stillness, a single word mouthed over it that no priest has taught you. You don't say it aloud now, the room is too thin-walled for comfort. But you hold the cup in your hands for a breath longer than you need to, letting the cool surface press into your palms until you can feel the pulse in your wrists answer it. Outside, the street is coming alive. You hear the low clatter of a cart, the rhythmic sound of a broom sweeping dust into the gutter. Somewhere nearby, a woman laughs, quick and short, and the sound makes you glance at the door. Even laughter can feel dangerous here. It reminds you that words travel faster than footsteps, and no matter how quiet your house feels, the world is always leaning in to listen. You eat without hurry. Each bite of bread is chewed long enough to feel the grain soften, to give your jaw time to match its rhythm to your thoughts. You think of the teachings you've read in secret, about how the material world is a shell, a shadow, a copy of something brighter. It makes the bread taste different, as if it's only an echo of the food it's meant to be. You drink the water in slow swallows, letting the thought follow you, that even in something as simple as drinking, there is a choice to be made about what you take in and what you leave untouched. Halfway through, there's a sound from the street that makes you pause, the heavy, deliberate step of someone in boots, not sandals. A shadow passes across the linen over your window. Whoever it is doesn't stop, but the echo of their stride stays in your ears longer than it should. You set the bread down. Your eyes drift to the cloth bag beneath the cot, where your pouch and parchment rest. It's not that they'd be obvious if found, not unless someone knew what they were looking for. But here, all it takes is the wrong pair of hands and a mind eager to make connections where none were spoken aloud. When the sound fades, you finish your bread and water in silence, clearing the table with the same care you began the day. You think of the bread as body, the water as spirit, and the space between them as the narrow gap you must learn to walk without falling into either side. In this town, even breakfast is a kind of confession, one you've learned to make without speaking. Your books are not the kind you leave in plain sight. In fact, calling them books might be generous. Most are little more than stitched-together pages, copied by hand from other stitched-together pages, each one carrying the uneven handwriting of someone who probably wrote it in the same kind of nervous quiet you're living in now. They're fragile, not because of the paper, though that's thin and brittle, but because of the ideas. The words themselves are enough to turn them into evidence if they ever land in the wrong hands. The church calls them heretical texts, dangerous to the soul. You've heard the sermons, the way the friars describe them as snares laid by the devil, baited with clever lies that seem like truth to the untrained ear. But you know these writings aren't temptations, they're questions. They ask where the soul comes from, where it's going, and why the path to light should be lined with obedience to men instead of to God. And that is what makes them dangerous. Not because they twist the truth, but because they untie the knots someone else worked hard to make permanent. You keep them wrapped in cloth, buried under the spare blanket in the chest at the foot of your cot. Not because you expect anyone to look there, though you've imagined the scene often enough, but because it's the only place you can stand to put them. Every night, when you're sure no one's watching, you take one out. You run your fingers along the edge, feeling where the stitching pulls tight, and you open it like someone opening a locked door without permission. The pages smell faintly of smoke and oil, the kind of scent that lingers when candles burn too close to parchment. The ink varies from page to page, some deep and dark, others faded to the colour of tea. You've memorised certain lines not because you planned to, but because you couldn't forget them even if you tried. Lines about the divine spark being trapped in flesh like a bird in a cage. Lines about the world as a shadow of a better one. Lines about knowing God not through intermediaries, but directly, as if speaking across a narrow bridge that no one else can cross with you. You read until the air in the room feels thick, until every sound from the street outside makes your heart shift its weight. Then you close the book, wrap it again, and slide it back into hiding. The danger isn't just in owning them, it's in how they change you. Once you've read these words, it becomes harder to sit in the pews and let someone else explain the mind of God for you. It becomes harder to bow your head and not think of the questions burning behind your closed eyes. That's why you keep them hidden, not only from others, but from yourself when the day is too sharp with risk. In the wrong moment, even the thought of them could be enough to draw someone's suspicion. And suspicion here is a door you never want to see open. It comes just after you've put the last page away, the sound you've been training your nerves to expect and praying you'll never hear, a knock that isn't timid and isn't friendly, 3 slow raps that land like stones drop down a well and take too long to hit the water. You don't move at first. Stillness is your first defense, the practiced pause that lets the room decide whether it wants to betray you. The candle on the table gutters and steadies, as if it understands that flame is a kind of witness. You glance toward the chest at the foot of the cot, the folded blanket lying innocently above the cloth-wrapped bundle that is not innocent at all, then drag your gaze away because looking at danger gives it shape. The knock comes again, softer this time, as though whoever stands outside knows that the second attempt will be mistaken for mercy. Your mouth dries. You think absurd things, that your hands smell like ink, that the table still remembers the weight of the stones you traced earlier, that silence itself might be dusted with the meanings you've tried to hide in it. You cross the room once, twice, not pacing, just rearranging yourself, and lay a palm against the door without opening it. Through the wood, you feel the faint vibration of breathing, the warmth of a presence, the waiting. A word, a voice says finally, not loud, not harsh, but practiced, the way a fisherman speaks when he already knows what's in the net. You consider all the small choices that pretend to be big ones, to answer or not, to pretend you were out, to cough and buy a moment, to make the voice on the other side repeat itself until it grows impatient and says more than it planned. You choose the oldest trick you have, ordinary life. You scrape the stool lightly so it sounds like furniture being moved. You cough once. You make water slosh in a cup. All the theatre of harmlessness. And then you unlatch the door to the width of 2 fingers and say, as if this is a bakery and you have flour on your sleeves, yes. The man outside is not in robes, which is worse. Friars declare themselves by habit. Informers dress like neighbours. He's the kind of face that can listen for a living, eyes practiced at pretending to understand. He asks after your health, after the cold, after whether your roof leaks, small mercies used as tools. You answer in monosyllables and let your voice carry fatigue instead of fear. He mentions the bell, asks if you attended, doesn't wait for your reply, mentions a sermon about unity, about how good people stand together in times of confusion. You feel each word pass your ear like a bead you refuse to count. Then he says the quiet part, almost kindly. There are gatherings, he's heard, little prayer circles sprung up to supplement proper devotion, harmless as tea and yet somehow always in the wrong rooms at the wrong hours. Has anyone invited you? You laugh softly, the laugh of someone unremarkable, and let a little embarrassment colour your cheeks. You say you keep odd hours because sleep is not a friend, that you light candles when the drafts are bad, that you talk to yourself when the mice are bold. All of it is true. None of it is the truth he wants. His eyes shift to the gap of your door as though the darkness behind you is a person. He thanks you for the conversation that wasn't one, then adds, like a sprinkle of salt on a wound, that there will be visitors tomorrow asking the same harmless questions, and it is always better to have your answers ready before the questions arrive. When he leaves, the corridor swallows his footsteps too quickly, as if the stone is on his side. You close the door, latch it twice, and stand with your forehead against the wood, absorbing the faint chill. The room looks exactly as it did an hour ago, but it is not the same room. The knock is still here, stitched into the grain of the door, thudding against your ribs. You blow out the candle and listen to your own breathing until it sounds like someone else's. Then you sit, hands in your lap, and begin the only prayer you dare, one that has no words, only the steady, stubborn decision to remain ordinary for one more day. It starts with nothing more than a glance. A sideways flicker of eyes across the market square as you pass the vegetable stall, the kind of look that isn't long enough to be called staring, but is far too precise to be called casual. You pretend not to notice, the way you pretend not to notice the friars counting heads at festival processions. But the look stays with you like a burr caught in wool. She's an older woman, broad-shouldered from years of lifting buckets from the well, her hair streaked silver under a scarf tied tight against the wind. You've spoken to her before, in the careful brief exchanges that make up life here, how the bread is dense this season, how the frost has been late, nothing more. And yet, yesterday, you knelt in the alley behind your lodgings, drawing with your fingertip in the dirt. Not an image anyone here would recognize, just the simple outline of a circle broken by two lines at its center. You brushed it away the moment you heard footsteps, but maybe not soon enough. When you looked up, she was there, pausing with her basket on her hip. She said nothing, just shifted her weight, adjusted her scarf, and walked on. At the time, you told yourself it was nothing. Today, her glance tells you otherwise. You buy onions you don't need, because buying something gives you a reason to stand still and think without looking like you're thinking. The market noise swells around you, the cry of a fishmonger, the scrape of wooden crates, the bright, too loud laughter of men who have already had too much wine. Somewhere behind it, you catch the low hum of the church bells being tested for the noon service. And you know how stories begin here, not with proclamations but with murmurs, not with truth but with the shape of it, passed from mouth to ear until it becomes sharp enough to cut. On the walk back, you pass her house. It's small, pressed between a cooper's shop and a tanner's shed. Smoke curls from its chimney, carrying the heavy scent of boiled greens. You keep your eyes ahead, but you can feel her presence in the narrow gap between the curtains, the weight of it as distinct as a hand on your back. You wonder what she saw yesterday. A man tracing idle patterns in the dirt, or a heretic marking the world with signs that should have died centuries ago. At your door, you pause, not long enough to seem hesitant, but long enough to listen. The street behind you is quiet now, the way quiet feels when it's just holding its breath. Inside, the air is colder than you left it. You close the door, slide the latch, and stand still in the center of the room. In another time, you might have gone to her, smiled, explained, made it into something harmless before it grew teeth. But here, explanation is just confession in a softer voice. Better to let the circle in the dirt fade from memory, if it can. Better to keep your own circles small, hidden, unbroken. You sit at the table, break a crust of bread, and chew slowly, listening to the creak of wood in the rafters. Outside, somewhere down the street, a door closes. You imagine it's hers, and you wonder if tomorrow, when the friars walk past, she will glance at them the way she glanced at you. Not long, not casual, just enough. You wake before dawn, not because you want to, but because that's the hour when the town still belongs to the shadows. The streets are empty, the windows dark, and the only sound is the distant drip of water in the alley. It's the safest time to pray, though safe here is a relative word. You sit on the edge of the cot, feet flat on the cold floor, and let your hands rest loosely in your lap. The words you speak, half aloud, half inside, don't match the ones the friars chant. They're older, stranger. They rise and fall in a rhythm that doesn't fit the church bells, flowing like water through a shape no one else seems to remember. These prayers don't ask for forgiveness or mercy. They don't promise service to the institution or the hierarchy. They are more like riddles, each line folding into the next, meant to be turned over in the mind like a smooth stone in a palm. They speak of light hidden inside matter, of the soul as a wanderer who has forgotten its home, of a God too vast to fit entirely in any single image or name. You've memorized them over years, copying from scraps of parchment that were copied from scraps before that. Each phrase carries the weight of generations, softened at the edges by the mouths that have whispered them in the dark. You know what the friars would say if they heard you, that these words are poison, that they undo the work of salvation, that they twist the truth into something dangerous. But when you speak them, you don't feel poisoned. You feel steady. You feel like you're holding a rope that stretches backward into centuries and forward into places you'll never see. And here, in the cold stillness of the room, that connection feels more like life than anything you've been handed by the altar. The candlelight is weak, but it's enough to catch the faint glimmer of the carved stones on the table. You arrange them again before beginning, not because they have power in themselves, but because they remind you of the order beneath the noise. A circle broken in one place, a triangle set inside a square, symbols that, to the unknowing eye, look like nothing more than idle decoration. To you, they are reminders that what's visible is never the whole. Outside, you hear the faintest stir of the town beginning to wake, the scrape of a door being unbarred, the shuffle of feet on frozen ground. You pause, the last word of the prayer still hanging in your mind. You don't finish it aloud. Instead, you let it fade into the quiet where it can't be stolen or repeated. The stone circle remains on the table a moment longer before you gather the pieces into the linen pouch, slipping it into its place beneath the chest's false bottom. By the time the sun reaches the window, the room will look like any other. You'll stand at the door, nod to your neighbours, and speak of bread, weather, and the coming market day. And no one will know that in the hour before light, you gave your loyalty not to Rome, but to something without walls, without titles, and without permission to exist. The first time you stayed home during a holy procession, you told yourself it was because of the cold. That was true enough. The wind had a way of cutting through wool, as if the cloth were nothing but a memory. But deep down you knew it was for another reason. Processions are not simply about honouring God. They are about showing who belongs, who stands in line, who kneels when the cross passes, who makes the sign at the right moment. They are a moving ledger of loyalty, and every face in the street is an entry. Today, you stand in the shadow of your doorway as the sounds draw closer. First, the murmur of the crowd, low voices punctuated by an occasional laugh that fades quickly, as if someone remembered where they were. Then, the slow beat of the drum, not martial but ceremonial, keeping time for the shuffling steps. Finally, the swell of voices, chanting in Latin, the words rolling over each other in a rhythm that is both beautiful and heavy, like silk woven too tightly. You can see them now, the friars at the front, their hoods pulled low, hands clasped in front of them. Behind them, the altar boys, small and solemn, swinging censers that trail ribbons of incense into the cold air. The smell reaches you even at a distance, thick, sweet, and almost cloying, as if it wants to fill not just your lungs, but your thoughts. Behind them come the townspeople, row after row, each carrying a candle whose flame trembles with every step. You know where you would be if you joined them. Somewhere near the back, your candle small, your face turned toward the ground so no one can see the thoughts in your eyes. But here, at the edge of the street, you're an onlooker, part of the scenery. You lean against the doorframe, arms folded, as if you have no more stake in the passing of this crowd than you would in the weather. Still, you watch. Not because you feel drawn to it, but because watching is safer than turning away. You take note of who is present, who walks with whom, who sings loudly, and who only moves their lips. There is a language in this, a silent one, and you've learned to read it. You notice the neighbour who looked at you too long in the market, now marching with her eyes fixed forward. You notice the informer from the last inquiry, carrying a candle so tall it makes him bow his head slightly, as if humility could be measured in wax. The procession passes, and you remain in the doorway until the last of the chant fades into the distance. The street is littered with small drops of wax, hardening where they've fallen. You wait until no one is looking, then stoop and touch one. Cool now, its shape imperfect, as though the flame had struggled to keep it alive. You roll it between your fingers for a moment before letting it fall back to the stone. When the street is empty again, you close the door behind you. The smell of incense still lingers, threading into your clothes, as if it means to follow you. You tell yourself it will fade by morning. You know it won't. It starts with the prayer book you borrowed from the church library. The the one with the leather binding worn soft at the edges and the faint scent of incense clinging to its pages. To anyone else, it's just another volume of the Psalms, safe, acceptable, unremarkable. But to you, it's a canvas. You read the words as they're written, but in the narrow margins, in ink so pale it almost blends into the paper, you add your own. Not whole sentences, never anything bold enough to catch the eye at a glance. Just marks, shapes, and fragments, the kind of annotations that look like idle doodles to anyone who isn't trained to see them. A small spiral at the end of a verse is a reminder to look beyond the literal. A dot above a certain word means it's part of the older teachings. A pair of parallel lines across the page marks a thought that has a mirror in another place entirely, perhaps even another book. It's a language you learned in pieces, from hands and mouths you'll never see again. Sometimes you forget where you picked up a particular sign, whether it was from a parchment smuggled under a loaf of bread or whispered into your ear at a gathering that dissolved before morning. You work on the pages slowly, careful not to blot the ink. The scratches are faint, each one the size of a breath, but you know they could be enough. All it would take is a curious friar or a neighbour's child with sharp eyes. That's why you never leave the book in sight. It goes into the chest when you're not reading, wrapped in a strip of cloth and tucked beneath the spare tunic you almost never wear. You handle it the way some people handle relics, always with a sense of both reverence and danger. Sometimes when you're alone and the air is still, you open the book and trace the marks with your finger, following the path they weave between the printed lines. They lead you from one page to another, creating a web of connections that the book itself doesn't admit to having. In these moments you feel a quiet sort of triumph, as though you've hidden a second book inside the first, a shadow text that only lives because you've given it space to breathe. But that feeling doesn't last long. As soon as you close the cover, the weight of the leather in your hands reminds you of the risk. The Church believes in truth as something fixed, something that must be guarded from alteration. And here you are, altering. Not the truth, you'd argue, just the way to find it. Still, you know how it would look, not as curiosity, not as devotion, but as evidence. You slide the book back into its hiding place, making sure the cloth covers it fully. When you let the lid of the chest fall shut, the sound seems louder than it should be, echoing against the walls of the small room. You sit for a moment in the quiet, your hands still, your eyes on the grain of the table. Outside, the church bells begin again, slow and steady, calling everyone else to prayers they already know by heart. You stay where you are, your own prayers tucked between pages where only you can read them. Silence is supposed to be holy here. The friars preach it from the pulpit, calling it a virtue, a posture of humility before God. In their telling, silence is the soil in which obedience grows. But you've learned there are different kinds of silence, and not all of them are welcome. The one they want from you is the silence of agreement, the stillness of someone who accepts every word spoken from the altar without question. The one you practice is different. It's the silence of someone listening for a voice that isn't theirs, or the church's, or even the voice everyone insists is God's. It's the quiet that happens when you stop letting the world fill the air for you. It shows on your face sometimes, and that's the danger. At the market, during the sermon, when a neighbour is telling you about the priest's latest warning, your eyes go somewhere else. You're not gone long, just long enough for them to notice. It's not the kind of absence you can explain. If you tried, the words would come out too honest, that you were thinking about the divine spark hidden in every soul, or the secret maps you've read of the soul's journey back to the source, or the thought that maybe truth isn't always found in the loudest room. The people here aren't trained to see the difference between a quiet listener and a quiet dissenter. To them, all silences look the same, until they don't. And once they decide yours is the wrong kind, it can't be undone. They'll start to remember moments you didn't speak when you should have, the times you hesitated before repeating the familiar words. They'll begin to assign meaning to pauses that were never meant as rebellion. That's how it works. Suspicion grows in the spaces you leave empty. This morning, you're in the square, buying a measure of barley from the miller. He's a slow man, heavy-handed, and he keeps talking as he works, telling a story about a family fined for skipping the last feast day. You nod at the right points, but your mind drifts. The way the grain runs between his fingers reminds you of the old writings about the soul passing through different realms, sifting itself until it's clean enough to return home. You picture the image in your head, light trickling down through shadow, finding its way back upward again. It's the sound of your own name that pulls you back. The miller is looking at you now, squinting slightly, the sack of barley paused mid-fold. "You hear me?" he asks, not unkindly, but with just enough curiosity to make your chest tighten. You smile quickly, take the sack from him, and say yes. Of course, you were only thinking about the price. He laughs and shakes his head, muttering something about dreamers, but the moment sticks, he noticed. Back in your room, you set the barley down and sit in the stillness. You think about how easily quiet can be misread, how it can be mistaken for guilt, for distance, for a mind working in ways it shouldn't. The kind of silence you carry isn't loud enough to defend itself. It's a language only you speak, and here, speaking it at all is the risk. It begins as nothing more than a murmur drifting in from the street, the kind of sound you'd usually ignore if it weren't for the hour. The town council doesn't meet in the middle of the morning, not unless there's business pressing enough to draw men away from their shops and fields. You move to the small window, careful to keep yourself hidden behind the linen curtain. Across the square, in the hall with the red-tiled roof, you can see the door standing open just enough for shadows to slip through. 3 men enter together, one of them the baker who always stares a moment too long when you pay an exact coin. Another is the scribe whose neat hand records every transaction, every tithe, every change in ownership that passes through this town. The third wears the heavy brown cloak of the mayor, though the hood is down so you can see his thin mouth and the way he holds it as though tasting something bitter. A 4th figure follows them inside, a friar, his robe pulled close against the cold. That's unusual. The council governs the market and the roads, the church governs the soul. When both are in the same room, it usually means trouble for someone. You can't hear the words, only the low swell and fall of voices, but the tone carries. It's not the brisk rhythm of merchants arguing over grain. It's slower, heavier, with the kind of pauses that mean a name has been spoken. You wonder if it's yours. You tell yourself it's not, that they could be discussing taxes, land disputes, anything at all, and yet your hands tighten around the curtain without realizing it. A boy runs past the window, chasing a hoop, and for a moment you're pulled back to the ordinary world. But when he disappears, the council hall is still there, the shadows inside still moving. You step away, but it's no use. The mind insists on filling silence with pictures. You imagine them leaning together, the friar's voice low as he explains the concerns that have reached him. A neighbour's mention of your late-night candle, someone else noticing you absent from the last procession. Little things, small enough on their own, but in a room like that they can be woven together into a net. The meeting lasts longer than it should. When they finally emerge, their expressions are unreadable in the grey light. The friar walks separately, his hands hidden in his sleeves, his head inclined just enough to look like thought or prayer. The others disperse into the square without speaking to one another. You stand in the middle of your room, staring at the table, the chest, the stool, as though these plain objects might betray you if they were questioned. You think of the books, the stones, the faint marks in the margins. You think of the way suspicion doesn't arrive with a shout. It starts with a whisper, passed along until it finds the ears willing to listen. By nightfall, the square will be busy again, and no one will speak of the meeting. But the air will remember, and so will you. It's a small thing, or it should be. A candle burning after the rest of the town has gone dark, hardly a crime in itself. But here, where the nights are quiet enough to hear the hinge of a door across the street, even a flame becomes part of the gossip. Tonight you've let yours burn longer than you should. The wax has melted into a pale lake around the wick, the flame swaying slightly each time a draft slips under the door. You tell yourself you'll put it out after you finish copying a single passage, but the words are stubborn. They demand care. And so the light stays. Your room glows in a way it shouldn't at this hour. Outside, most windows are already black, Only the tavern still throws a warm spill of light into the street, and that will fade soon. Your candle stands alone, a small beacon on an otherwise sleeping road. You think of it as private, unseen, until you hear the soft crunch of boots on frost. Someone is walking past. The sound slows as it nears your door. You don't move. You imagine the figure glancing upward, seeing the faint glow through the linen-covered window. They might think nothing of it, or they might think of the friar's warnings about what people do when they believe no one is watching. You remember a sermon from weeks ago, the friar's voice sharp with urgency as he spoke of midnight inquiries, of those who gather in darkness to exchange words not sanctioned by Rome. He spoke of light as both truth and exposure. What is lit can be seen, he said, and though the meaning was meant to be noble, you heard the warning beneath it. You wonder now how many others in that congregation made the same connection. You lean forward and cup your hand around the flame as though shielding it from a gust. In truth, you're shielding it from sight. The boots move on, their rhythm returning to the steady pace of someone with no reason to stop. Still, you can't shake the thought that a moment has been added to your record, an invisible ledger kept in the minds of neighbours. The candle continues to burn. Its light is the colour of warmth, but the room feels colder now. You close the book you've been working on and slide it beneath the folded blanket in the chest. Then you stare at the flame a little longer, knowing you should snuff it out, but reluctant to surrender the small comfort it offers. In the quiet, you can hear the faint hiss of melted wax cooling against the metal holder. Finally, you pinch the wick between dampened fingers. The sudden darkness is complete, the kind that feels solid in the air. You sit in it for a moment, letting your eyes adjust, thinking about how something as small as a candle can become a story. Here, the wrong light at the wrong time is enough to make someone wonder, and wondering, in this place, is the first step toward deciding you need to be answered for. The well in the centre of the square has always been the kind of place where you can disappear into routine. People draw water, exchange a few words, move on. Nothing lingers there except the smell of damp stone and the creak of the rope as it lowers the bucket. That's why you notice him immediately, the man who doesn't belong. He's standing just beyond the ring of cobblestones, not drawing water, not speaking. His cloak is plain, but too clean for someone who works with his hands. The hood is pushed back enough for you to see a face that is careful in its stillness, the kind of stillness that comes from watching without wanting to be seen doing it. His eyes pass over the crowd slowly, like someone searching for a word in a page of text. You're in line behind two women, your empty jug in hand, trying not to look at him for too long. When the first woman steps away, you glance toward the bucket, but his gaze catches yours. It's not an accusation, yet, just an awareness, a quiet acknowledgement that you've seen each other. That's when you know he's not simply a traveller. Travellers don't hold eye contact like that. The women ahead of you murmur about the weather, about the frost in the fields, their voices just loud enough to cover the sound of the rope turning. You keep your eyes on the bucket, watch the water sway gently as it rises. The stranger shifts his weight, and for a moment you think he might be about to speak. Instead, he moves toward the trough where the horses drink, running a hand along its edge as though testing the grain of the wood. When your turn comes, you lower your jug, listening to the hollow echo as the water pours in. You can feel the pull of his presence behind you. It's not physical, it's the kind of pull that comes when someone has already decided you're worth remembering. You replace the bucket carefully, thank the woman beside you without really hearing her, and step away. The path home takes you past the trough. You keep your gaze forward, but you catch the movement in the corner of your vision. His head turning slightly, his eyes following you just enough to confirm what you already know. He'll recall your face later, maybe your walk, maybe the way you didn't greet him. By the time you reach your door, you've built the whole story in your mind. A stranger arrives. He lingers in the square. He asks harmless questions about who lives where, who works late, who burns their candles past midnight. No one thinks much of it until the next inquiry, when his notes appear in someone else's hands. You set the jug down inside and close the door, your pulse still uneven. The well is supposed to be a place of necessity, not danger. But today it's become something else. a place where you learned that being noticed is not the same as being seen, and being seen is not always safe. It comes to you in the most ordinary way, a knock at the door, softer than the one that carries threat, followed by the voice of a neighbour offering a small kindness. You open it to find her standing there, hands wrapped around a bundle of cloth. She says it's a gift, nothing special, just something she thought you could use. The way she smiles is careful, like she's holding it in place. You take it, because refusing would be stranger than accepting. The cloth is warm from her hands, and inside is a loaf of bread, dark crusted and smelling faintly of rosemary. The scent should be comforting. Instead, it makes you uneasy, not because of the bread itself, but because gifts here are rarely without meaning. She asks nothing in return. She doesn't even linger, just nods once, her eyes scanning the room over your shoulder before she turns away. You close the door slowly, the loaf still in your hands, feeling its weight as if it's something more than food. In another place, you might believe it's only kindness. Here you've learned to see the threads running beneath the surface. A gift can be a way to mark who's willing to take something from whom. It can be a way to prove familiarity or to test it. It can be an excuse for someone to remember standing in your doorway, to recall the details of what they saw inside. The table bare of any holy tokens, the candle stub burned lower than it should be, the faint scent of oil that isn't quite like the one used at the altar. You set the bread on the table and step back. The crust glistens faintly in the light, as though inviting you to break it. Hunger tugs at you, but suspicion is stronger. You imagine the questions that could be asked later. Did you eat it right away? Did you thank her? Did you wonder why she brought it? Every answer becomes a shape someone else can twist. You decide to leave it untouched for now, wrapping the cloth back around it and placing it inside the cupboard. The room feels different with it there, as though it's a silent witness to your hesitation. You wonder if she'll ask about it later, if she'll notice how quickly, or slowly, it disappears. That night, you lie awake, listening to the wind against the shutters. The bread is still there, waiting, the rosemary scent faint in the cool air. You think of all the ways trust can be tested without ever using the word, and you know that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the room isn't the object itself, but the choice it forces you to make. It slipped under your door sometime between the deep hours of night and the pale grey of dawn, quiet enough that you don't stir when it happens. You find it in the morning, a single fold of parchment lying just inside the threshold, no seal, no mark to show where it came from. You crouch to pick it up, and the first thing you notice is the weight, light, as though whatever it carries is meant to travel easily, unnoticed. The handwriting is careful, almost too careful, each letter shaped to avoid betraying the hand that made it. There's no greeting, no signature, only a short line written in the middle of the page. There will be questions. Be ready. Nothing more. You read it twice, then a third time, as if repetition will coax meaning from the space between the words. Questions from whom? About what? The letter assumes you already know, and that's what makes it more dangerous than if it had named anything outright. In this place, vagueness is not mercy. It's the kind of precision meant to make you turn every possibility over in your mind until the weight of them becomes its own punishment. You look at the door, at the faint gap beneath it. Whoever left this knew how to approach without waking you. They also knew enough to make their warning, or their threat, impossible to ignore. The letter could be a kindness. It could also be the beginning of a trap, meant to make you nervous, to see how you behave when you think you're being watched. You imagine eyes on you at the market, at the well, in the moments you pause too long before answering a question. The thought is enough to make your pulse quicken. You fold the parchment again, smaller this time, and slip it between two boards in the wall where the gap is hidden by your cot. Out of sight doesn't mean out of mind. It sits there now, invisible but present, like a stone in a pocket you can't forget you're carrying. The rest of the morning feels different, each sound sharper. The friar's voice drifting from the square is louder than usual, the clatter of a cartwheel over cobblestones too sudden. Even the smell of baking bread carries a strange edge, as though the air itself is aware of something shifting. You keep your face neutral when you step outside, but your thoughts are restless. You've lived with caution for so long that it's become your normal, but this is different. This is a message that doesn't tell you where to look, only that the looking will come. And in a place where answers are often decided before questions are asked, readiness might mean nothing at all. The church is colder than usual this morning, though the braziers burn in their usual places along the stone walls. You sit near the back, as you always do, where the shadows of the high beams reach down over the pews and the light from the stained glass fades before it touches you. The friar stands at the pulpit, his hands resting lightly on the edges of the carved wood, and begins with the familiar blessing. But almost at once, you can feel it. The sermon isn't for the congregation, it's for you. He speaks of those who carry secret words in their hearts, words not given to them by the church. He speaks of those who pretend to walk in the light, but spend their nights in shadows, tending to thoughts that were planted by other hands. He warns that heresy does not always announce itself in open defiance, but in the subtle shaping of belief that moves a soul away from obedience. The words are general enough to pass as teaching, but the rhythm of his voice, the slight emphasis on certain phrases, the way his gaze lingers, these are not accidents. His eyes scan the pews, and when they reach the back, you feel the pause. It's a brief moment, just long enough for you to know you've been marked. Then he moves on, returning to the cadence of the lesson, letting the tension dissolve into the air like incense smoke. Around you, no one shifts uncomfortably or glances your way. They hear a sermon. You hear an accusation disguised as scripture. You keep your expression neutral, the way you've learned to when suspicion drifts too close. You bow your head at the right moments, let your lips shape the amens, even though the words feel heavier than they should. When the sermon ends, the congregation rises and shuffles toward the doors. You wait until most have gone, not wanting to be caught in the press of bodies where glances can be exchanged without words. The friar stands near the threshold, blessing each person as they pass. When your turn comes, his hand hovers above your head, the gesture light, but his eyes hold yours for a fraction too long. Outside, the air is sharp and clear, the sunlight pale on the stones. People disperse into the square, speaking of bread and weather, as though they haven't just been warned to watch for heretics among them. You walk home at a measured pace, careful not to look over your shoulder. The words of the sermon stay with you, turning over in your mind. They weren't about you, not openly, but in a place like this, it doesn't take much for those who stray to become a single person in the minds of enough listeners. And once the seed is planted, all it needs is time. It's the sound of the knock that tells you something is different. Not hurried, not polite, measured. 3 sharp raps, then a pause, as if the person on the other side already knows you'll open the door. When you do, the scribe is standing there, his ink-stained fingers clasped around a roll of parchment. His eyes are pale, watchful, the kind that see details before they decide on words. He greets you with the formality of someone who has been here before, though you can't recall inviting him. He says he's been sent to confirm certain matters for the town records. The phrase is deliberately vague. You know better than to ask what matters. You know better than to give him the satisfaction of watching you wonder. Instead, you step aside and let him in, because refusing would be worse. He moves through the room like a man measuring it. His gaze touches the table, the shelf, the small chest in the corner. Not lingering, but not casual either. He notes the absence of things as much as their presence. The lack of any holy relic on the table, the plainness of the walls, the single candle stub near the window. When he sits, he unrolls the parchment and smooths it flat. The questions begin simply enough. Your name, your work, the dates of certain events in the past season. Then they turn softer, but sharper. How often you attend the processions, which friar you last spoke to, whether you've been visited by travellers. His tone is calm, almost friendly, but you can feel the space tightening with each answer. You respond evenly, letting your words carry neither too much nor too little detail. You know the danger lies not in the truth itself, but in the way truth can be made to lean in a chosen direction. Every time he pauses to note your answer, the scratch of his quill is a sound you can feel in your ribs. At one point, he glances up from his writing and asks, almost idly, if you've been reading anything lately. Your heartbeat catches, but your face does not change. You mention the Psalms, the same verses everyone here knows by heart. He nods once, but his eyes stay on you for a moment longer before returning to the page. When the questions are done, he rolls the parchment again and stands. He thanks you for your time, though the words carry no warmth. At the door, he pauses, as if deciding whether to add something more. Whatever it is, he keeps it to himself, stepping out into the pale light and walking away without looking back. You close the door, your hands resting against the wood for a long moment. The air in the room feels different now, as if the scribe has left something behind. Not an object, but a mark. A sense that whatever record he carries will outlast your own voice, and that in this place, what is written has a way of becoming the only truth that matters. The market is always loud, vendors calling prices, customers haggling, the thud of sacks being dropped onto wooden stalls. It's the kind of noise that swallows small conversations whole, which is why you usually feel safe there. But today, the sound doesn't protect you. It's in the middle of weighing out beans that the question comes, dropped into the air so casually you almost think you imagined it. It's the cooper's wife, her hands full of apples, her smile fixed in that way people wear when they're trying to make a thing seem harmless. She asks if you've heard the friar's latest teaching about hidden influences. The phrase is too pointed to be innocent, but too broad to accuse you directly. The worst part is, it's a question you can't refuse to answer without making yourself interesting. You nod and say yes, you were there for part of it. You keep your tone light, as though you found it no more remarkable than a weather report. But her eyes are studying you, not for your words, but for what might slip through between them. She asks what you thought of it, tilting her head slightly, like she's inviting a confidence. You give her one of the oldest evasions, agreeing without agreeing. You say it was a strong reminder that the times do seem to call for vigilance. Both phrases can mean whatever the listener wants them to. Still, her gaze lingers a moment before she shifts to speak to the next customer. You turn back to the stall, but your pulse is uneven. This is how it begins, not with an accusation, but with a shared topic. People talk about the weather to be friendly. They talk about sermons to see which way the wind blows in someone's soul. As you hand over your coins, you hear her voice behind you, lowered slightly as she speaks to the man in line. You can't make out the words, but you don't need to. You know your name will be part of the conversation, even if it's only a passing mention. Here, a passing mention is enough to plant a seed. The walk home feels longer than usual. The bag of beans in your hand seems heavier, though you know it's not. Every person you pass feels like someone who could have been told something about you, and you can't know which version they've been given. By the time you reach your door, you're aware that the market is no longer just a place to buy food. It's another place where words can be traded like currency, and you are a coin someone has decided to spend. Rain blurs the edges of the world tonight. It runs down the glass in uneven lines, turning the street outside into a moving watercolor of shadow and lantern light. You've been sitting by the table, the single candle sputtering against the dampness in the air when the knock comes. 3 quick raps, close together, urgent enough to make you stand before you've thought it through. When you open the door, the rain sweeps in, cool against your face. A man stands there, cloak heavy with water, the hood pulled low. He doesn't step inside, just leans slightly toward you and says your name as if to confirm you're the right one. His voice is low, steady, the kind people use when they want to sound unthreatening but still be obeyed. He says he's been sent to deliver a message, but he doesn't offer it in writing. Instead, he tells you there's to be a gathering tomorrow night, just outside the walls, where the old path meets the willow grove. He doesn't say who will be there or why you're being told. He simply adds that it would be wise to attend. You know better than to agree out loud. You only nod once, enough for him to see you've heard. He steps back into the rain without another word, vanishing into the moving grey before you can decide if you've actually seen his face. You close the door, leaning your weight against it. The candlelight feels too fragile now. the shadows too deep. A gathering outside the walls could mean anything: trade, worship, judgment. Here, every meeting has more than one purpose, and every invitation is a test. If it's a trap, they'll be watching to see if you go. If it's not, refusing might mark you more than attending. That night, the sound of rain against the shutters keeps you awake. You think about the path beyond the walls, the way the ground there turns soft and quiet after rain, the smell of wet earth under the willows. You imagine arriving and finding familiar faces, neighbours you've nodded to in the square, only to realise you're all there for different reasons. The candle burns low. By the time you finally snuff it out, the knock and the voice have already begun to feel less like a choice and more like a command. And you know that tomorrow night, whatever waits for you beyond the walls will be another step in a story you no longer control. The air is heavy with the smell of wet earth when you reach the willow grove. The rain from last night has left the ground soft, muffling your steps, but the branches still drip steadily, each drop a tiny echo in the quiet. There's no lantern light to guide you, only the thin glow of the moon slipping through the leaves. You can hear movement before you see anyone, the faint crunch of boots, the soft shuffle of cloth. A small group stands in the clearing, their faces half hidden in shadow. Some you recognise, people you've passed in the market, neighbours who've nodded to you without a word. Others are strangers, their expressions unreadable. No one greets you outright. Instead, there's a shared glance, a silent acknowledgement that everyone here has arrived for something that can't be spoken aloud in the square. In the centre, a man in a dark coat speaks in a voice just loud enough to carry. He talks of truth buried beneath layers of doctrine, of the divine spark that belongs to all and cannot be owned by a single church. His words are careful but unmistakable. Around you, some faces stay still, others tilt slightly forward as if trying to catch every word. You keep your expression neutral, but inside, you feel the strange pull of recognition. The ideas he speaks aren't new to you. They're echoes of things you've read in the margins of forbidden texts, things whispered in the pauses between ordinary conversation. Hearing them aloud feels like standing in the open for the first time, even though you haven't said a thing. The meeting lasts less than an hour. No one lingers when the man stops speaking. People turn away in pairs or alone, slipping back into the shadows as if they've been here only for a walk. You start toward the path, keeping your pace steady, but a voice calls softly behind you. It's one of the strangers, a woman with a thin scar along her cheek. She tells you to be careful. Not everyone here came to listen. The way she says it leaves little doubt that she's not speaking in riddles. You nod, and she fades into the trees without another word. The walk back to the walls feels longer than the walk out. You keep imagining the unseen routes others might be taking, the conversations they might already be having about who was there. By the time the gates come into view, the night air feels colder, heavier, as if it's carrying something you'll never be able to put down. When you close your door behind you, the smell of damp leaves clings to your clothes. The grove is gone, but the memory of it stays, along with the knowledge that, whether you wanted it or not, you've now been seen among them, and here, being seen is sometimes all it takes. It's the absence you notice first. Her door, usually propped open during the day, is shut tight. No smoke drifts from her chimney, no sound of the wooden spoon tapping against a pot. You tell yourself she might be away visiting family, but in a place like this, unexplained absences are rarely simple. By midday, the whispers have already started. At the well, someone says she was taken for questioning. At the market, another claims she left in the night, leaving her possessions behind. No one says her name too loudly. Names have a way of sticking to whoever speaks them, like ash to wet skin. You think back to the gathering beyond the walls. She was there, standing just across from you in the shadow of the willow branches. You didn't speak, but you saw her eyes lift when the man in the dark coat talked about the soul's freedom. She didn't look afraid then. Now her door is closed, her windows dark, and the absence feels louder than any knock. In the afternoon, you walk past her house. The shutters are fastened from the outside, the way they do when someone leaves in haste, or when someone is kept from leaving at all. You keep moving, resisting the urge to slow down, because pausing would make you part of the story. That night, you lie awake, listening to the wind drag across the roof. You think about her bread, always traded for herbs at the market, her laughter when the scales tipped in her favour. You think about whether her name might now be in the same breath as yours, somewhere in the conversations you can't hear. It strikes you that disappearance is as much a message as an arrest. You don't have to see the chains to feel their weight. The empty space she leaves behind is meant to be a warning, that those who go too far from the line don't come back. In the dark, you wonder if she's somewhere cold, answering questions she can't answer correctly, or if she's already been sent beyond the reach of anyone who might try. You also wonder, though you don't want to admit it, whether she might have spoken your name before the door closed behind her, and so you keep your candle dark that night, sitting in the quiet, trying not to imagine your own absence and the way it might be spoken about in the market, at the well, or in the next gathering you may never see. It's not the kind of book anyone would notice at first glance. The binding is plain, the cover worn to a soft grey-brown, the lettering on the spine too faded to read unless you hold it in the right light. You've kept it tucked beneath the folded linens in the chest for months, taking it out only in the safest hours. Tonight, when you open the chest, it isn't there. At first you think you've misplaced it, that perhaps you left it on the table and forgot, but the table is bare. The shelf holds only the small jar of oil and a few scraps of parchment. You lift the linens one by one, checking the folds, your movements growing sharper with each pass. The book is gone. Your mind rushes to the last time you held it, the way your fingers traced the margin notes written in a hand not your own, the way the pages smelled faintly of smoke. It wasn't a book meant for public eyes. In the wrong hands, its words could be twisted into proof. Not proof of what you believe, but proof of what someone else has already decided you must be. You sit back on your heels, listening for sounds outside. Nothing. Only the low creak of the beams as the night air cools them. Whoever took it could be anyone. The boy who carried in your water last week, the neighbour who borrowed your knife, the scribe who stood too close to the chest during his visit. It doesn't matter who holds it now. What matters is that it's gone from your keeping, and the next time you see it, it may not be in your hands at all. It may be on the table in the council hall, its pages open beneath the steady gaze of the friar. The margin notes will be read aloud, each line heavy with the weight of interpretation. You imagine them asking if the words are yours, if you can explain why you kept them. You imagine trying to answer without condemning yourself, knowing the attempt might be useless. Here, books like that don't have innocent owners. You close the chest and press your palm against the lid as if you could still keep the secret inside. But the room feels different now, emptied of more than paper and ink. It feels as though a part of you has been taken out into the open, and you have no way of knowing when or how it will be brought back into the light. The well has always been the one place where sound belongs. The creak of the rope, the splash of water against the bucket, the low murmur of neighbours exchanging harmless news. It's the rhythm that keeps the mornings from feeling too heavy. But today, when you arrive with your jug, the air is wrong. People are there, but the usual chatter has thinned into something tighter, more measured. The baker's wife stands with her back to you, her head tilted toward the cooper's apprentice. Their voices are so low you can't catch the words, but you can see the way their eyes cut toward the path as you approach. A boy draws water without looking up, his shoulders hunched as though the very act of glancing at you might matter later. You lower your jug into the bucket and draw it up, the rope rasping over the wood. The sound feels louder than it should, like it's announcing you to everyone within earshot. When you lift the jug, you notice that the space around you has shifted. Subtle steps backward, bodies angled away, as though they're giving you room. It's not kindness, it's distance. No one says your name, no one asks after your health or the weather or the late frost in the fields. The absence of words is sharper than any question. It leaves you standing there with the jug in your hands, wondering how long it will take for this silence to grow into something heavier. As you turn to leave, you catch the faintest flicker of a glance between the baker's wife and the apprentice. It's quick, like the closing of a door. You don't need to know the words they've exchanged. You already understand their meaning. The path home feels different than it did yesterday. Even the air seems to carry less weight of conversation, as though the silence from the well has followed you. Inside, you set the jug down and stand there for a moment, listening to the emptiness of the room. Silence here is not the absence of sound, it's the presence of decision. It means someone has spoken enough in private that they no longer need to speak to you in public. And once that kind of silence settles, it rarely leaves without taking something with it. The well has always been the one place where sound belongs. The creak of the rope, the splash of water against the bucket, the low murmur of neighbours exchanging harmless news. It's the rhythm that steadies the mornings, giving them a shape that feels older than the walls themselves. You have always liked it for that. The noise is predictable, familiar, and it covers whatever thoughts you'd rather keep to yourself. But today, when you arrive with your jug, the air is different. The square feels thinner, as though the wind has swept something away and left the space bare. People are there, but the usual chatter has dissolved into short phrases, clipped and careful. The pauses between words are longer than they should be. Even the sound of boots scuffing over the cobblestones seems quieter, as though everyone has agreed, without speaking, to keep the morning muted. The baker's wife stands near the well, her back to you, her scarf pulled tightly around her neck despite the mild weather. She leans toward the cooper's apprentice, speaking so softly you can't catch the shape of the words. You don't need to. You can see the way her head tilts slightly when she notices you coming down the path. You can see the flicker of the apprentice's eyes in your direction, and the way he quickly lowers them to the ground. A boy is drawing water from the bucket, his arms straining as he lifts it up and tips it toward his jug. He doesn't glance at you, though most people would nod at least once in greeting. His shoulders are drawn in, as if keeping himself small will keep him invisible. You step forward, lower your own jug into the bucket, and draw it up. The rope rasps over the wood, the sound scraping through the stillness like a blade. Every turn of the handle feels louder than it should, and for a strange moment you wonder if they can hear your pulse over the grinding rope. When you lift the jug free, you notice something else. The space around you has shifted, not in a way that could be marked, but in a way you can feel. People have angled their bodies away, just enough to create a pocket of air between you and them. It is not the space of courtesy. It is the space of separation, the unspoken signal that you are no longer entirely within the fold. No one says your name, no one asks about your health, the weather, or whether your roof still leaks after the rain. The absence of words presses harder than any accusation could. It leaves you holding your jug with a weight you didn't feel when you first carried it here. As you turn to leave, you catch the briefest exchange of glances between the baker's wife and the apprentice. It is over in less than a breath, but it carries the heaviness of something settled. The walk home feels longer than it should. The silence of the well follows you, clinging to the air like damp cloth. Inside, you set down the jug and stand still, listening to the emptiness. Here, silence isn't just the absence of sound. It is a verdict already whispered into being, a verdict that no one needs to speak aloud. It begins as a sound so faint you think it's part of your own thoughts, a low murmur, muffled by stone, seeping through the seam where your wall meets the neighbour's. At first, you try to ignore it, focusing on the slow scrape of your spoon against the bowl, the steady rhythm of your own breathing. But the words begin to take shape, and once they do, you can't stop hearing them. They are not speaking your name. Not yet. But you recognise the pattern, the deliberate softness, the way certain phrases are lowered even further, the pause before the listener responds. This is how dangerous things are spoken in safety, not in the open square, but in the thin space where walls are supposed to protect privacy, and instead carry secrets like water through cracked clay. You push your chair back slowly, setting the spoon down so it won't clatter. The sound becomes clearer near the far corner, where the plaster is older and uneven. The voice on the other side is one you know, the cooper's wife. Her tone is light, almost curious, as though she's asking about the weather, but the words are too precise. She is asking whether he still has visitors, whether the light is still burning in his window past the hour when most are asleep. The listener gives short replies. Yes, sometimes, not often. Enough to be useful. You know they could be speaking of anyone, but your own window does burn later than most, the candlelight stretching across the square long after other houses have gone dark. You tell yourself it's harmless, a habit born of reading, of working with your hands in the quiet hours. But in a place where darkness is supposed to belong to sleep, even the smallest light can be seen as a signal. The murmur fades, replaced by the faint shuffle of chairs and the dull thud of a closing door. You stay still for a long moment, your breath shallow, before finally moving back toward the table. The bowl of stew has cooled, the skin forming over its surface. You eat without tasting it, listening for the next sound from the wall, though none comes. Later that night, as you trim the candle wick, you notice how close the flame sits to the window. You imagine its glow spilling into the street, the way it might catch in the corner of someone's eye as they pass. You think of the cooper's wife, the tilt of her voice, the careful gathering of small details into something larger. When you blow out the flame, the darkness rushes in faster than you expect. The room feels tighter without the thin cushion of light, the walls closer. You sit there for a while, hands resting in your lap, hearing nothing but the deep silence of night. Yet beneath it, there's an almost tangible weight, as though the words that crossed the wall are still hanging in the air, waiting for the right moment to settle where they will do the most harm. Most spiritual leaders who preach detachment from the physical world keep their distance quite literally. They sit apart, speak in measured tones, and cultivate an aura of untouchable serenity. Brother Saivren, however, believed that true spiritual connection required intimacy, but not the kind that involved actual contact. He called his method touchless intimacy, a practice that seemed contradictory until you experienced it firsthand. Saivren had taken vows of poverty, silence, and celibacy, but he claimed these vows did not forbid him from entering the space of another's soul. He would stand or sit just close enough that you could feel the heat radiating from his body, his breath almost brushing your cheek, his eyes fixed unwaveringly on yours. It was a closeness designed to stir something deep, or at the very least, make you intensely aware of the space between you. During his gatherings, Saivren would select a participant and beckon them forward. They would kneel or sit cross-legged before him, and he would lean in until their faces were separated by mere inches. No words were spoken. Instead, there was an extended exchange of steady breathing and sustained eye contact. He described this as allowing the souls to merge without the corruption of flesh. Followers said it could last for minutes or even hours, during which the rest of the room faded into nothingness. The effect was powerful, though opinions varied on why. Some claimed to feel a profound energy passing between them, a warmth in their chest, even the sensation of time slowing. Others admitted the experience made them uncomfortably self-conscious, their minds darting between the spiritual significance of the ritual and the awkwardness of maintaining unbroken eye contact with a man who had not blinked for several minutes. Saivren maintained strict rules during these encounters. No one was to speak, move, or break the gaze until he did. If a participant shifted nervously or looked away, he would gently but firmly guide their chin back toward him with a single finger, the only touch permitted. He insisted this was not a violation of his vow, but a course correction to preserve the integrity of the intimacy. His community defended the practice as a pure form of connection that transcended the limitations of the body. Critics, however, saw it as a form of performance, a way to command attention and create the illusion of depth through sheer proximity. Saivren ignored the complaints, continuing his quiet sessions, his face always just close enough to make you wonder whether you were truly sharing in the merging of souls, or simply standing in the longest, strangest stare-down of your life. Whatever the truth, those who participated rarely forgot it. Whether they left feeling spiritually awakened or simply relieved it was over, they carried the memory of a man who could make the absence of touch feel as charged, as deliberate, and as unsettling as touch itself. The gate is usually just a place you pass through, an ordinary threshold between the market and the road beyond. Guards stand there every day, but they don't notice much unless you give them reason to. Today, though, there's a man leaning against the stone arch just inside the shadow, and he's watching every face that moves past him. You've never seen him before. His clothes are plain, but too well kept for a tradesman, the sort of neatness that suggests purpose rather than pride. His hands rest lightly on the strap of a leather satchel slung across his shoulder. He doesn't speak to anyone, doesn't call out or step forward. He only looks, and his gaze follows people like a slow-turning key. When you approach, you feel the weight of his eyes before you're close enough to meet them. He doesn't glance away when yours lift to his. Instead, he holds the look just long enough to make you uncertain whether to nod or ignore him. You choose neither, keeping your expression as still as possible, and step through the gate with your basket balanced against your hip. But you can feel him turn slightly, following your movement. The sound of boots against stone echoes faintly behind you, not quick enough to be pursuit, not slow enough to be chance. You take the long way home, winding past the tanner's yard and the narrow lane by the mill, listening for the rhythm of his steps. Twice you think you've lost it, only to hear it again, steady, unhurried, always a few paces behind. When you finally reach your street, you risk a glance over your shoulder. The man is gone. No figure in the road, no shadow in the alley mouth. You tell yourself you imagined it, that the sound belonged to someone else entirely. But when you step inside and close the door, your hands linger on the wood, pressing it shut as though that alone will keep whatever followed you from crossing the threshold. All afternoon you think about his eyes, calm, assessing, not searching for trouble so much as deciding whether you fit a pattern already drawn in his mind. You think about the satchel, about what might rest inside it, papers with names, records of questions and answers, scraps of handwriting matched to other scraps. The rest of the day passes quietly, but the stillness doesn't settle. You find yourself listening for the echo of boots outside, for the faint shift of weight against stone. The gate, you realise, isn't just an opening in the wall, it's a sieve. Most people pass through without notice, but some are caught, not by the guards, but by eyes that are there for no one to see until they are already watching you. And once you've been noticed, you're never certain if you've been let go, or simply left for later. The evening begins quietly. You light the single candle on the table, its small flame stretching shadows across the walls, and sit with the basket of mending in your lap. The rhythm of the needle through cloth steadies your hands, the way it always does when the day has been too full of glances and silences. Outside, the street is almost still. Only the occasional echo of boots carries through the air. It's just past the hour when you would normally shutter the window that the knock comes. Not sharp, not hurried, but deliberate. You open the door to find a man you know only by sight. He's been at the market before, always quiet, always standing just far enough away to seem uninterested. Tonight, he smiles in a way that makes the candlelight behind you feel exposed. He says he was passing by and thought to ask a small question. His tone is casual, almost apologetic, as though the question might be nothing at all. He steps no further than the threshold, but leans just enough for the light to catch his face. The question is simple in form, dangerous in substance. Whether you have heard of a certain gathering, one that, he says, has been spoken of in whispers among those who think differently. The phrase is deliberate. It's the kind meant to pull you toward a confession without actually asking for one. You keep your voice even, your eyes steady, and say you have heard no such thing. It's the truth, if you take it literally. You heard of a gathering, yes, but not by the name he has given it. He tilts his head slightly, studying your face as if the answer might be hiding there in the muscle of your jaw or the shift of your gaze. Then he smiles again, the kind of smile meant to seem friendly but doesn't reach the eyes. He says that's good, very good, because such things only lead people into trouble. When he leaves, you don't close the door immediately. You watch him walk away, his pace unhurried, the line of his shoulders straight as though he's certain of his place in the street. You wonder how many other doors he will stand at tonight, how many other questions he will drop into the air like seeds. Back inside, the candle has burned lower. The flame flickers as you sit again, but the work in your lap feels different now. Each stitch seems louder in the quiet, each shadow longer. You think of the way he phrased it, those who think differently, and how such words are not just descriptions, but labels, the kind that can be passed from one person to another until they settle in the wrong hands. The night feels heavier as you trim the wick and watch the light shrink to a thin glow. You tell yourself it was only a question, but here, questions are never just questions. They are lines drawn in the dark, and you never know which side you've been placed on until it's too late. The chapel is small, its walls holding the scent of old wood and candle wax. The benches creak as people settle in, the air filled with the rustle of cloaks and the soft clearing of throats. You sit in your usual place, 3 rows from the front, close enough to hear the readings, but far enough to keep your head lowered without drawing notice. The light from the high windows spills in at an angle, catching the dust in slow-moving streams. It isn't until the first hymn begins that you notice the absence. The seat beside yours, always taken by the tanner's apprentice, is empty. At first you think he might be late, delayed by work, but as the hymn ends and the reading begins, the bench stays bare. No shifting weight, no quiet cough, no faint smell of leather dust that usually clings to his clothes. You tell yourself it's nothing. People miss prayer for all sorts of reasons. A sick relative, a cart that broke a wheel, a late delivery. But in the weeks past, the apprentice had begun lingering after service, speaking in low tones to a few others before slipping away toward the outer road. You never heard what was said, but the way they drew close, shoulders angled inward, had its own meaning. The friar reads from the book, his voice steady, but you can feel the glances. Not toward you, not toward anyone in particular, but toward that empty space. Absence draws the eye, and in a place where every presence is measured, an absence can be as loud as a shout. When the final blessing is given, people rise in unison. You stand too, keeping your movements even, your eyes on the floor. As you step outside, the air feels sharper, as though the light itself has thinned. Conversations begin in small clusters, but you catch the shape of the apprentice's name more than once. Each time, the tone is neutral, too neutral. You walk toward the market road, but halfway there you see the cooper's wife again, speaking with the friar near the edge of the square. Her hand rests lightly on his sleeve, her voice lowered. The friar nods once, then turns toward the chapel with a look that could be anything: concern, curiosity, or decision. That night, the image of the empty bench stays with you. You picture the apprentice at his work, his hands darkened by the oils used to treat hides. You picture him on the outer road, head bent in conversation. You picture him somewhere else entirely, perhaps seated at a different kind of table, answering questions he cannot afford to answer wrong. You don't know if he will return next week, or if his absence will grow into the kind that's never filled. But you know this: in the memory of the chapel, that bench will not be forgotten. Every time someone glances toward it, the shape of the missing figure will be there, silently warning the rest of you how quickly a place can be left behind. The square is busier than usual, the air thick with the smell of roasted chestnuts and damp wool. Stalls crowd the edges, their canvas covers dripping from the morning's rain. You keep to the outer edge, moving at a pace that lets you look without lingering. The familiar faces are easy to spot: the butcher wiping his hands on his apron, the girl from the mill arranging sacks of flour. But it's the man near the fountain who holds your attention. You've never seen him before, and here, that is reason enough to notice. His clothes are plain but clean, the sort worn by someone who wants to pass as ordinary. He carries no basket, no tools, nothing to suggest a reason for standing in the heart of the square. His eyes follow the flow of people with a precision that feels deliberate, as though he's not looking for anything in particular but watching for how people react to him. You catch his gaze for only a moment before you turn toward a stall selling dried figs. Still, you can feel his attention like the weight of a hand on your shoulder. When you move on, you sense him shifting too, not following, not approaching, but adjusting his position so you remain within view. It's a kind of presence you've seen before, though never aimed at you so directly. Men like this don't ask questions in public. They don't need to. They listen for your name to fall from someone else's mouth, or for a look to pass between you and the wrong person. Every small thing you do becomes another piece of something they are assembling in silence. You try to leave the square without glancing back, but the fountain's splash seems to follow you until you turn down a narrower street. The sound fades, but the unease does not. You keep imagining him still there, still standing, eyes on the flow of people, noting which faces return his glance and which look away too quickly. At home, you close the shutters, even though the light is still good. The image of him lingers, the stillness, the way he occupied the centre of the square without seeming to belong to it. You think of how many conversations might have crossed within his hearing, how many names he might have gathered in a single morning. In the days ahead, you know you'll pass through the square again, and you know the question will be in your mind each time. If he is there, will he be standing in the same place? If he is not, will that be better or worse? Because here, a stranger who watches is unsettling, but a stranger who vanishes before you can learn why he was watching, that can be far more dangerous. It begins as a simple errand. You've been sent to the scribe's shop to collect a small document, something harmless, a record of a market transaction that needs to be kept on file. The shop smells faintly of ink and parchment, the air warm from the small brazier in the corner. The scribe, a thin man with careful hands, greets you without looking up from his work. While he searches for your paper, you notice the ledger on his desk. It's large, bound in dark leather, and open just far enough for the edge of a page to be visible. You shouldn't look. You know better than to read what isn't meant for you. But your eyes find it anyway. Names, dates, brief notations written in the tight, neat script of official record. You almost turn away when something familiar catches at you. It's your name. The letters are plain enough, but they stand out like a raised scar. Next to it, in smaller script, is a phrase you can't quite decipher. The ink is fresh. The date is yesterday. Before you can read more, the scribe returns, placing your document on the desk between you. He notices the direction of your gaze, and just for a moment, the air changes. His eyes meet yours, calm but unreadable, and he rests one long finger on the edge of the ledger as if to remind you it belongs to him. Then, without breaking the look, he closes it. You take the document, thank him, and leave, but your steps feel unsteady. Your name in that book means more than simple record keeping. Ledgers like that aren't for debts or trades, they're for tracking people, movements, associations. Each name is a point in a map you can't see, a thread in a net you can't tell is being drawn tighter. Back at home, you set the document aside without opening it. The memory of the ink beside your name gnaws at you. You wonder how long it's been there, how many pages it has appeared on before now. You wonder who else is on that list, and whether their fates are already decided. The more you think about it, the clearer it becomes. The ledger isn't about what you've done, it's about where you fit in someone else's pattern. Maybe your name is there because of a meeting you didn't even speak at, or because someone else's words placed you in the wrong proximity. And once your name has been written in such a book, it rarely leaves. The ink may fade, the page may age, but the record remains, silent, waiting, ready to be called upon when the time comes to decide who belongs and who does not. It comes long after the streets have gone quiet. You've been sitting in the dim glow of a single candle, the flame almost burned down to the base, when the knock strikes the door. 3 slow raps, evenly spaced, too deliberate to be a mistake. No neighbour would come at this hour. No friend would knock without calling your name first. You sit perfectly still, the needle in your hand frozen mid-stitch. The silence that follows is worse than the knock itself. You wait for another, but it doesn't come. Instead, there's the faint scrape of something shifting just outside, the weight of a body near the door. When you finally rise, you don't move to open it. Instead, you press your ear to the wood, listening. A breath, low, measured, waiting. You don't speak. You don't even clear your throat. After a moment, the sound fades. First the breath, then the faint steps retreating into the street. You remain there for a long while, hand against the door, until the chill of the wood begins to seep into your skin. Only then do you slide the bolt across, not because you think it will keep anyone out, but because it feels like the only action left to take. Sleep is impossible after that. Every sound in the dark becomes sharper. The groan of the rafters, the whisper of wind at the shutters, the faint shift of your own weight on the bed. You keep picturing the space outside your door, the shadow that stood there, patient enough not to call out. By morning, there's no sign anyone came. No footprints in the dirt, no marks on the door. To anyone else, it would be as if it never happened, but you know better. In this place, knocks that come at the wrong hour aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to be remembered. And you do remember, because here, a knock isn't just a knock. It's a quiet announcement that you are on someone's mind, and the hour it comes tells you exactly how closely they want you to feel that. It starts, innocently enough. At the market, a man you've seen only in passing greets you by name. He smiles warmly, as though you've known each other for years, and asks about your family, your work, the weather on your street. His tone is casual, the kind people use when they are trying to put you at ease. You answer politely, even though the conversation feels just a shade too focused. Over the next week, you see him more often, once by the well, once outside the chapel, once on the road home. Each time he acts as if your meeting is pure chance. Yet somehow his questions grow sharper, not in their wording, but in what they seek. He asks if you've been keeping late hours. He asks who you speak to when you walk the outer road. He laughs when he asks, but the questions linger in the air long after you part ways. By the third meeting, you notice something else. He never offers much about himself. He says he's from a nearby village, but never names it. He says he trades in goods, but never says which. You realize he is gathering pieces of you without giving you any of him in return. One afternoon, as you return from the fields, he falls into step beside you. His voice is lighter than usual, but his words are heavier. He tells you about a certain household that was searched last month, about how it all began with nothing more than friendly talk that found its way to the wrong ears. His eyes watch you closely as he speaks, as if measuring your reaction. You give him little, just a nod, a few words of sympathy for the family. He smiles again, the same smile as the first day, but this time you see the calculation behind it. When you part ways, he clasps your shoulder in a gesture that feels too familiar for how little you know him. At home, you realize his presence is no longer just chance. A sudden friend can be as dangerous as an open enemy, especially in times when friendship can be mistaken or used as proof. Here, kindness is never free of weight, and a name spoken too warmly can be carried into places you would never choose to go. You tell yourself to be cautious, but the truth is, you've already been drawn into his circle. The only question now is whether you can step out before the warmth of his smile becomes the fire that burns you. It's early, the kind of morning when the light hasn't yet settled into the streets and the air still carries the chill of the night. You step toward the door to unbolt it for the day and see it, thin, folded, pushed just far enough inside that it catches the edge of your foot. No one has knocked, no one has called your name. You kneel and pick it up. The paper is coarse, the fold sharp, the kind made in haste but with intention. There is no seal, no mark to say where it came from. You pause before opening it, feeling the weight of it in your hands. It's light, but in this place, even a scrap of paper can carry more than words. When you finally unfold it, the message is short, a single line in an unfamiliar hand. Be careful who you speak to at the well. The ink is fresh enough that it smudges faintly beneath your thumb. There is no name, no signature, nothing to tell you whether the words are meant as a kindness or a warning, or both. You look toward the street through the narrow gap in the shutter, but it's empty. Whoever left it is gone. The stillness outside feels too complete, as though it has been arranged. You think of the conversations you've had at the well, of the glances you've caught when you thought no one was looking. You think, too, of the silences, of the way certain voices stop the moment you draw near. Folding the paper again, you slip it into the small box where you keep things that might matter later. You don't know why you keep it, perhaps to study the handwriting again, perhaps because part of you wants proof that you were warned. The words echo in your head all morning, altering the sound of every voice you hear. At the well that afternoon, you find yourself speaking less. You keep your answers short, your eyes on the rope and the water. The usual chatter flows around you, but it sounds different now, like a current with unseen depth. You catch the baker's wife watching you once, her expression unreadable. You can't help wondering if she knows who wrote the note, or if she's the reason it was written at all. By nightfall, the paper feels heavier in your memory than it did in your hand. You know it could mean nothing, but here, nothing is never simple. A warning can be a shield, or it can be a mark. The trouble is, you won't know which until the day comes when it's too late to matter. It's a small thing, barely more than a flicker. One night, as you pass along the outer road, you see it in the distance. A single candle burning in the narrow window of a house you've never known to be lit so late. The flame wavers in the wind's pull, its light shifting across the glass like a signal meant only for certain eyes. You tell yourself it's nothing. Someone could be ill. Someone could be working late. Someone could have simply forgotten to snuff the wick. But as you walk home, the image follows you, a lone light, steady in its place, while the rest of the street sleeps in darkness. The next night, it's there again. And the night after that. Always the same window, always the same hour. You never see the figure behind it, only the faint outline of movement, the suggestion of someone tending the flame. People here notice small things. A candle left burning can mean more than light. It can mean a meeting place, a sign, a reminder that someone is still awake when others aren't. You wonder who else has seen it, and whether they've asked themselves the same questions. On the fourth night, you linger across the street, keeping to the shadows beneath a bare-limbed tree. The wind carries faint sounds, a soft shifting inside, a door opening deeper within the house. Then the light is gone, not snuffed quickly, but eased into darkness as though someone was waiting for the exact moment to let it fade. When you return home, the silence feels heavier. You trim your own candle, watching the wick curl black as it dies. You think of how easily a small light can draw attention, how quickly a habit can become a sign, and you wonder, if someone were watching your window in the same way, what patterns would they see? It's market day, and the air is thick with the smell of smoke and damp cloth. You move through the crowd the way you always do, quietly, eyes lowered just enough to avoid the kind of glances that linger too long. Stalls brim with goods, but the usual calls from vendors are softer today, as though the whole square has agreed to speak beneath its breath. You stop at the baker's stall, the same place you've stopped for years, and yet the air between you feels different. He hands you the loaf without looking directly at you, and you notice the faint pause before his fingers let go. His wife stands a few paces behind him, her hands buried in her apron, watching not you, but the space around you, as if she expects something, or someone, to step in. That's when you hear it. Not your name, not even a word, but the change in tone in the voices behind you. A low ripple, brief and quick, like water stirred by a passing hand. You don't turn, but you feel the weight of it press between your shoulder blades. The words themselves are gone before you can catch them, but the shape of the sound tells you enough. It was about you. You walk on, forcing your steps to remain steady, but the sensation follows you through the square. Each time you pass a cluster of people, the pause is there, a breath's length of silence before their talk resumes. It isn't open accusation, it's worse. It's the question no one will ask you directly, but everyone will carry with them until it finds its way to the wrong ears. At home, the bread feels heavy in your hands. You set it down, trying to recall the exact moment the shift began. Was it the baker's pause, the glance from his wife, or did it start long before today, when your name appeared in quiet conversations you weren't meant to hear? Here, questions are rarely spoken aloud. They don't need to be. They move quietly, passed like coins from one hand to another, until they're heavy enough to tip the balance against you. And by the time someone asks them to your face, it's only because the answer no longer matters. It happens without ceremony. You wake to the same grey light, hear the same carts in the street, smell the same faint smoke from the baker's oven. Nothing feels different until you step outside. The first thing you notice is the absence of movement, the way two neighbours, speaking at the corner, don't pause to greet you. They don't look away either. They simply hold your gaze for a moment too long, and in that stillness, something settles. At the market, the change is clearer. People don't turn their backs as they did before, pretending you're not there. Instead, their eyes follow you openly. The murmur of talk doesn't drop when you pass. It swells, not in volume, but in weight, the way a pot seems heavier just before it boils. You know enough to keep your steps steady. You choose your words carefully, making each one short and unremarkable. But the truth is, in the faces around you, the careful neutrality is gone. What's left is a kind of readiness, a quiet agreement that the time for watching in secret is over. It's not that they know something new about you, it's that whatever they knew, or thought they knew, has reached the point where it no longer needs to be hidden. There is safety in whispers for those who speak them, but there is power in letting the subject know the whispers exist. By midday, you feel it in every space you enter. The baker doesn't pause before handing you your bread. The cooper's wife doesn't lower her eyes. Even the children in the street seem to look at you longer than they used to, their curiosity unsoftened by the caution of their parents. You walk home knowing this is the turn no one warns you about, the moment when silence stops being a shield. When it breaks, it doesn't do so with noise or accusation, but with the simple fact that people no longer bother to pretend. Inside, you close the door and sit for a long time without lighting the lamp. You think of all the small signs that led here, the glances, the pauses, the sudden questions wrapped in friendly tones. Each one was a thread, and now they've been pulled together into something whole. The hardest part is knowing there's no way to go back. Once they've stopped looking away, it's only a matter of time before they decide what to do with what they believe they've seen. And when that day comes, it won't arrive with a warning. It will be as quiet as the day you woke to find the watching had already changed. So, before the light fades, you take a slow breath and set your hands on the table. Whatever comes next, you tell yourself, you will meet it standing. And if you've made it this far, you've already lasted longer than they expected.